Greth had watched 14 civilizations die, that he had the records. 14 species, across 14 different star systems, each one gone because a Dracarin had passed through their part of the galaxy. Some had tried to fight. Most had tried to run. All of them had failed. He kept the records organized by species name, date of extinction, and method of death. It was quiet, careful work. Greth was good at it. Now he sat inside a human orbital station above a world called Callum's Rest, filing what he fully expected to be the 15th record. The station smelled strange. Humans always kept their spaces slightly too warm and slightly too loud. Someone down the corridor was laughing about something. Greth could not understand what could possibly be funny. The sky below the station had been turning red for 2 days. That red color was a Dracarin atmospheric signal. The creatures released charged particles ahead of their approach, particles that reacted with oxygen-rich atmospheres and stained the sky the color of cooling iron. Every species that had ever seen that color knew what it meant. Greth had assumed the humans would be evacuating. They were not evacuating. He walked to the main operations room and found it full of people standing around tables covered in maps and data screens, all of them talking at once. At the center of it stood a man named Ray Holden. Ray was not tall. He was not particularly impressive looking. He had the kind of face that suggested he had not slept in 2 days, but had no plans to start. He was pointing at a projection of the outer system and explaining something to 4 other people who were writing things down as fast as he spoke. Greth approached carefully. "Excuse me," he said. "I am the council observer assigned to document this event. I expected to find evacuation procedures underway." Ray looked at him. "No evacuation," he said simply. "We're staying." "I see," Greth said. He did not see. "May I ask why?" "Because running hasn't worked for anyone else," Ray said, and then went back to his projection. Greth stood there for a moment. Then he sat down in a corner chair and opened his recording device and began filing his preliminary notes. He wrote, "Humanity appears to have chosen to remain. Reason given is logical, but outcome is not expected to differ from previous civilizations. We'll continue to observe that a woman came and sat beside him without being invited. She had short hair and bright, tired eyes, and she was carrying a cup of something hot. 'You're the alien observer?' she said. 'Yes,' Greth said. 'I am Greth of the Voss Collective.' 'Nadia,' she said. 'Atmospheric physicist.' She nodded toward Ray. 'His plan needs my part to work. I've been awake for 40 hours making sure it will.' 'What is your part?' Greth asked. 'We're going to seed the Dracarin's flight path with charged ions,' she said. 'The creatures navigate by magnetoreception and heat. If we can interfere with their sensory input before they reach the colonies, we can redirect them or suppress their fire breath. Or both.' Greth processed this. 'That has never been attempted. That's why it might work,' Nadia said. And she said it like it was obvious. From across the room, Ray's voice rose above the others. He was explaining the situation clearly, without drama. 3 colony worlds in this system: Callum's Rest, New Brashov, and Daros Station. Population across all 3, 800 million people. The Dracarin migration route had shifted and was cutting directly through the system. The council had recommended full evacuation, but had also acknowledged that full evacuation was not possible in the available time. There were not enough ships. There was not enough time. Humanity was not evacuating. Ray finished his briefing, and the room dispersed into organized movement. People went to stations. Screens lit up. Outside the viewport, the red in the sky below had deepened to a darker shade, almost the color of dried blood. Then the long-range sensors triggered. Everyone in the room stopped out on the central display. A shape appeared at the edge of the system. It was enormous. The display had to rescale twice to show it properly. The Dracarin was roughly the size of a small moon, long and winged and ancient, its body radiating heat that the sensors measured in the same ranges as a small star. It moved slowly. It always moved slowly. It did not need to hurry. Nothing in the galaxy had ever successfully stopped it. The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone at a back console said, "Confirm contact. 1 Dracarin, outer system, bearing 274. And then, without missing a beat, they added, "Sova's wing is already in position." Ray said, "Good." Greth looked at the creature on the display. He looked at the red sky below. He looked at the humans in the room, none of whom were screaming, none of whom were running, all of whom were working. He updated his notes. He wrote, "They are not panicking. This is coordinated. I have observed 14 species face a Dracarin. None of them looked like this. I'm not certain what I am watching. I will continue to observe." Outside the viewport, the sky over Callum's Rest burned red, and the creature at the edge of the system moved slowly, steadily inward. The humans kept working. The archive footage was not easy to watch. Greth had seen it many times, but sitting in a corner of the human operations room with nothing to do but observe, he found himself reviewing it again. Species after species. Some had been more advanced than humanity. Some had been older, wiser, with faster ships and stronger weapons. One had possessed beam technology that could crack the crust of a small planet. None of it had mattered. The Dracarin absorbed energy blasts the way water absorbs a stone, with a ripple and then nothing. Conventional explosives were useless against creatures whose skin had evolved over millions of years in the heat of deep space. Running had only delayed things. The creatures followed heat signatures and magnetic fields, and populated worlds were impossible to hide. Every species had eventually been found. Greth closed the archive. Across the room, a young pilot named Sova was suiting up. She was not what Greth expected a soldier to look like. She was young, with dark eyes and an expression that shifted between total focus and something that looked almost like amusement. She was checking her ship's readouts on a handheld screen and talking to her co-pilot at the same time, doing both things quickly and without looking nervous. Greth had studied human body language enough to know the difference between calm and suppressed fear. Sova looked genuinely calm. Her mission was simple in description and dangerous in practice. She was to take a 4-ship scout wing and approach the Dracarin closely enough to collect real-time biological data, sensory output, heat distribution, the electromagnetic field it generated. Nadia needed those readings to calibrate the ion seeding correctly. Without accurate data, the seeding would be guesswork. Ray had approved the mission. He had not looked happy about it. "You come back," he said to Sova as she passed him. "Always do," she said. She didn't look back. Her wing launched quietly. On the display, for small signals moved out from the station toward the vast, slow shape at the edge of the system. The Dracarin had not accelerated. It did not need to. It was already inside the outer system boundary and moving toward the inhabited inner worlds at a pace that would bring it to Callum's Rest in approximately 19 hours. Nadia worked fast. The data from Sova's wings started coming in within the hour. Thermal maps, magnetic field readings, biological pulse patterns from the creature's internal organs. She read through it with the focus of someone who had been waiting for exactly this information. "There," she said, pointing at a cluster of readings on her screen. "Its sensory range is almost entirely forward-facing. The magnetoreception organs are concentrated at the front of the skull. If we see the ion field ahead of its path, not around it, ahead, it won't just be confused. It'll read the seeded area as empty space. A dead zone. Will it turn?" Ray asked. "It'll slow," she said, "and slowing buys us time." Ray nodded once. Then he called the colony worlds. What he asked them to do was uncomfortable. He asked them to go dark, all heat signatures, all electromagnetic output, city power, communications arrays, heating systems in buildings, industrial operations. Everything. 3 worlds, 800 million people, sitting cold and quiet in the dark as though they did not exist. Admiral Droz, who commanded the conventional fleet, did not hide his objection. He was older than Ray by 2 decades, and he had commanded more battles. And he stood at the edge of the operations room with his arms crossed. "You're asking civilians to suffer for a tactic that might not work," he said. "I'm asking civilians to be uncomfortable for 6 hours for a tactic that has a real chance," Ray said. "There's a difference." Droz looked at him. Then he looked at the display. Then he uncrossed his arms. 6 hours, he said. The order went out. Greth watched the colony worlds on the thermal display. One by one, the heat signatures faded. Cities that had blazed like embers went cold. The electromagnetic output dropped to almost nothing. Within an hour, 3 populated worlds looked, to any sensor sweep, like uninhabited rocks. The Dracarin slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. Its head, if the massive forward structure could be called that, tilted, sweeping. Searching. Sova's wing was still out there, close enough to the creature that the heat from its body was registering on their ship's sensors as an environmental hazard. Sova had cut her engine output to minimum to avoid drawing attention. She was coasting, silent, watching. She transmitted back one line. It's confused. It's actually confused. Nadia exhaled slowly. Greth noticed her hands had been tight on the edge of her desk. They relaxed slightly. Greth updated his notes. He wrote, "First sign of effect. The creature has responded to the absence of stimulus. Humanity has done something none of the 14 civilizations attempted. They made themselves invisible. Not by fleeing, by discipline. 800 million people chose cold and darkness over death. I did not believe this was possible." He paused. Then he added, "I may need to revise my expectations." On the display, the Dracarin drifted, confused, searching for something it could no longer find. The humans waited. For hours was a long time to sit in the dark. Greth had monitored the communication from the colony worlds during those hours. There were complaints, of course. Children asking why the lights were off. Elderly people in care facilities kept warm only by emergency chemical heaters. Businesses going quiet. But there was something else in those transmissions, too. Something Greth could not quite categorize at first. People checking on their neighbors. Humor passed between strangers over low-power radio. A man on New Brashov who spent the second hour of darkness playing a stringed instrument from his window while the street below sat in cold silence. Humans, Greth noted, were very strange. The Dracarin had not left. It circled slowly at the edge of the inner system, sweeping. It was patient in the way that ancient things were patient. Not because it was waiting, but because time simply meant less to it than it did to everything else. It had no concept of urgency. It would find the heat eventually, or it would move on. Ray could not allow it to move on toward the next system. There were more colonies there. He needed it redirected, not just delayed. He needed bait. The freighter was called the Wren. It was an old cargo hauler, decommissioned from commercial service and repurposed for exactly this kind of work. Its cargo bay had been stripped and refilled with heat emitters, industrial units that together would project the thermal signature of a mid-sized populated settlement, and 6 magnetic pulse generators that would broadcast a strong, clean electromagnetic field. To a Dracarin, it would look and feel like a target. The Wren had no crew. It was remotely piloted from the station. Except Sova had changed that. Ray found out when the Wren's pre-launch checklist came in with a human crew manifest at the top. One name, Sova, listed as primary pilot. He stared at it for a moment. He called her. "The Wren is faster with a human pilot," she said before he could speak. "The remote lag is 0.3 seconds. That's enough lag to get the ship killed if the Dracarin reacts faster than projected." Ray was quiet. "You know I'm right," she said. He knew. "Come back," he said again. "You keep saying that like I don't intend to," she said. The Wren launched. It moved away from the station at first on a quiet, low-power trajectory, drifting casually, and then when it cleared the sensor shadow of the station, it switched on the heat emitters and the pulse generators and immediately became the loudest, most obvious thing in the inner system. The Dracarin turned. The room went still. Every person watching the display saw the massive shape shift, reorient, and begin moving toward the Wren's signal. It moved with sudden, terrible purpose, the slowness gone, replaced by the focused momentum of something enormous that had found what it was looking for. Sova did not panic. She brought the Wren around on a heading that curved away from all 3 colony worlds and pointed into open space toward the outer system's far edge where there was nothing. No planets, no stations, no people. Just vacuum and distance. The Dracarin followed. "Phase 2, Ray said. Nadia was already at her station. The ion cannon array was positioned in high orbit above Callum's rest, angled toward the Dracarin's current flight path. The seating had to be placed precisely. Too close, and the creature would burn through it before the chemistry took effect. Too far, and it would disperse before contact. She fired a 3-second burst. The charged particles spread invisibly across the Dracarin's projected path, a soft curtain of disruption hanging in space between the creature and the Wren. The Dracarin flew into it without slowing. Then it breathed. The flame came out wrong. Instead of a coherent column of superheated plasma, it scattered, dispersed in a wide, weakened fan that lit up the surrounding space in orange and faded quickly. The Wren was well outside the range of the dispersed flame. The fire died in space. The creature made a sound. It registered on the station's audio sensors as a deep, resonant vibration that passed through the hull and into the floor. Greth felt it in his feet. In the operations room. Someone exhaled loudly. Someone else made a short, sharp sound of relief. Nadia leaned back in her chair and pressed both hands flat on the desk. It worked, she said quietly, like she was confirming it to herself as much as anyone else. Ray did not celebrate. He was already looking at the secondary display, because the sensors had just confirmed what none of them had planned for. There was a second Dracarian that IT had been behind the first, hidden in the larger creature's electromagnetic wake. It was smaller, still the size of a respectable moon, and it was not following the Wren. It was moving directly toward New Brashov. That Ray's expression did not change. He looked at the display for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned to Admiral Droz. Droz was already putting on his command headset. "I'll take the second," Droz said. "Don't die, sir," Ray said. "Noted," said Droz and walked out. Greth looked from a door where Droz had just left to the display, showing 2 massive creatures moving through the system. One chasing a decoy ship into empty space, one heading for a populated world. He opened his recording device. He did not write anything yet that he was not sure what to write. Droz did not have a clever plan, that he was the first to admit it. Ray's approach was built on physics and patience, and making the enemy confused. Droz's approach was built on experience, stubbornness, and a willingness to put his ships directly between the creature and the people it was heading toward. It was not elegant. It was what he had done. He took 12 warships, the heaviest in the human fleet, the ones with the strongest electromagnetic output and the most reinforced hulls, and he formed them into a wall. Not a weapon. A wall. The ships locked into a tight formation and activated their combined electromagnetic arrays at maximum output. The goal was not to hurt the Dracarin. The goal was to create a field so dense and disorienting that the creature would have to slow and reorient before it could push through. Every second it slowed was a second New Brashov still existed. That IT worked partially. The Dracarin slowed, but did not stop. It pushed into the field like something walking through deep water, slowed, head swinging, confused by the noise, but still moving. The ships on the outer edges of the formation began taking the physical effects. Not fire yet. The creature was still too disoriented to target effectively. But the pressure wave of its movement, the way space itself compressed slightly before something that large, was enough to push the lighter ships out of formation. 2 ships broke position. One lost main power and drifted. The other regained control and came back. Droz held the wall. He kept his voice flat and steady on the command channel because he knew his crew was listening, and the tone of a commander's voice during something like this was worth more than most weapons. He moved ships to fill gaps. He redistributed the electromagnetic output to compensate for lost units. He did not express doubt, and he did not express fear, and when one of his younger lieutenants asked if they should pull back, he said, simply, "Not yet." Meanwhile, Sova was still running. The Wren had done its job almost too well. The lead Dracarin was fully committed to the chase now, and it was faster than the original projections. Sova had been forced to push the freighter's engines higher than planned, and the heat from the emitters in the cargo bay was beginning to affect the ship's own internal temperature. The hull readings were climbing. She adjusted course, cutting a wide arc around the outer system. The Dracarin followed the arc precisely. It was locked on. She needed one more ion pulse from Nadia's cannon to finish the fire suppression. The first pulse had disrupted the flame chemistry, but not fully neutralized it. A second pulse, placed correctly, would complete the process. But the ion cannon was now on the wrong side of the planet. Callum's rest had rotated during the last 4 hours, and the cannon's orbital position no longer had a clear angle to Sova's location. Nadia identified the problem in the same moment Sova reported it. "I need the cannon repositioned," Nadia said. 17 degrees orbital shift. The cannon was mounted on a platform. The platform had thrusters. But the repositioning burn would take 20 minutes and require the platform to pass through a section of the Dracarin's previous flame path, which was still hot. Ray sent the order to the platform crew. The crew of the orbital platform were not military. They were maintenance workers, engineers, and technicians who kept the cannon functional. They had not trained for combat maneuvering. When the order came in, their crew chief, a quiet woman named Bex, read it twice, looked at the heat readings for the path they would need to cross, and then told her team to strap in. They did the burn. The platform crossed the hot zone in 4 minutes. The hull temperature spiked. 2 external sensors failed. The platform came out the other side intact, completed its adjustment, and Bex transmitted back to operations. "In position. Ready when you are." Nadia fired the second pulse immediately. The ion spread across Sova's projected path ahead of the pursuing Dracarin. The creature flew into the field. Sova flew through it first. The field had no effect on human technology. The Dracarin hit the seeded zone at full pursuit speed. It breathed again. This time there was nothing. Not a dispersed flame. Not a weakened blast. Nothing. The creature's internal fire chemistry had been fully disrupted. It exhaled a wave of superheated but harmless gas, visible on the sensors as a bright thermal bloom that faded into space without touching the Rin. The creature made a sound again. Deeper this time. Longer. Greth, listening from the operations room, recognized the frequency. He had heard it in recordings before, old recordings from the early history of his own species, from a time before the Voss Collective had learned to simply leave when the sky turned. Red.it was the sound of something that did not understand what had just happened to in the second theater. Droz had not moved his wall. His fleet was battered. 1 ship had gone fully dark and been recovered by a rescue tug. 3 others had structural damage. But the second Dracarin had not reached New Brasov. It was circling now, pressing against the electromagnetic wall and retreating, pressing and retreating, like it was testing something it wasn't sure was real. Droz kept the wall up. He was running on 0 sleep and bad coffee and 40 years of not knowing when to quit. Ray looked at both displays. Both Dracarin were impaired. Both were slowed, but neither had left. The first would eventually notice the Rin was not actually a settlement. The second would eventually find a way around the wall. He needed to end this. He called Nadia. "Tell me about the territorial signal," he said. The territorial signal was a theory. Nadia had found it buried in the biological data Sova had collected on the first pass. The low-frequency electromagnetic pulse that the Dracarin emitted every few hours, distinct from its navigation signals, distinct from its heat output. A steady, rhythmic broadcast that didn't seem designed for any external purpose. Unless it was. Nadia had cross-referenced it against behavioral record from the 3 previous Dracarin encounters where the creature had changed course without apparent cause. In 2 of those cases, there had been a similar signal recorded, but stronger, coming from outside the system. She had run the comparison 4 times before she was sure. "They avoid each other," she told Ray. "The signal is territorial. It tells other Dracarin that this space is already claimed. That's why they sometimes change course. Not because of ships or weapons. Because they detected another one already here." Ray stood very still. "Can we replicate it?" "We already did," she said. "I've been modeling it for 6 hours. I needed the second pulse to confirm the frequency range." She looked at him. "If we broadcast it from the combined output of the fleet, all engines, all electromagnetic arrays, tuned to the right frequency, it'll register as a territorial claim from something bigger than either of them." "Will it work?" "I don't know," she said. "But nothing has ever made a Dracarin hesitate. This might." Ray went to the fleet channel. He explained it once, clearly. Every ship, Droz's wall, the escort vessels, the station arrays, everything would synchronize their engine output and electromagnetic systems to broadcast the territorial signal simultaneously. It would last for 30 seconds. If it worked, Both creatures would read the signal and react to it. If it didn't, they would have just made themselves extremely visible to two enormous creatures that were already angry. Droz, from his battered flagship, said, "I've had worse plans." Synchronize. It took 8 minutes to coordinate. 8 minutes of Sova keeping the Wren running in a wide circle. 8 minutes of Droz holding his wall by willpower alone. 8 minutes of Greth sitting absolutely still in the operations room with his recording device closed because he had stopped taking notes somewhere in the last hour. Then Ray said, "Now." Every human ship in the system fired at once. Not weapons, not thrusters, but their electromagnetic cores, tuned and focused and aimed outward in a synchronized burst. The station's arrays joined. The orbital platforms joined. Even the Wren's 6 pulse generators contributed, Sova triggering them manually at exactly the right moment. The signal went out that IT was, by every measurable standard, enormous. It registered on sensors across 4 star systems. The Voss Council Observer Station, 3 light hours away, detected it and sent an urgent query. 2 passing merchant vessels from unrelated species received it and immediately changed course, not knowing what it was but understanding instinctively that something very large had just announced itself. The first Dracarin stopped, not slowed. Stopped at IT hung in space, its vast wings spread and locked, its head sweeping slowly. The Wren drifted forward for a moment before Sova caught it and held position. The creature was close enough to the Wren that Sova's hull temperature was reading elevated from the creature's ambient heat. She did not move. Across the system, the second Dracarin stopped pressing against Droz's wall. It pulled back. One of Droz's officers reported it quietly over the channel, like she was afraid speaking too loudly might break whatever was happening. The first Dracarin made a sound. Low and long and complex, multiple tones layered together. Greth recognized it immediately. He had heard it once before, in an archive recording so old the file format had required 3 conversion programs to open. It was the sound a Dracarin made in the presence of another territorial claim. IT was hesitation, but a Dracarin was hesitating. Greth stood up from his corner chair. He was not certain he had planned to. His legs simply moved. Ray said quietly to Sova, "One pass." Sova understood immediately. She brought the Wren around slowly, pointing it directly at the creature's face, and she flew toward it. Not fast, not with weapons active, just a small, beat-up freighter moving with complete calm directly towards something the size of a moon. And if the creature was truly hesitating, truly reading the system as already claimed by something larger, it would not act aggressively. A Dracarin challenging a territorial signal would reassess, not attack. If the hesitation was incomplete, the Wren would cease to exist in about 4 seconds. Sova flew the pass. The creature watched her. Its eyes, each one large enough to be seen clearly on the station's visual sensors, tracked the Wren across its field of vision. It breathed, but the chemistry was still disrupted. Only hot gas came out, washing across space behind the Wren without harm. Then it turned, slowly, with the immense patience of something ancient that had simply decided this space was not worth the energy. The first Dracarin turned away. Its wings resettled. Its heading shifted. It began moving outward, away from the colonies, away from the Wren, toward the outer edge of the system dot on the other display. The second Dracarin was already gone. It had turned while everyone was watching the first, slipping quietly away from Droz's wall like it had never been committed to begin with. The operations room was silent. Ray stood at the center of it and watched the displays for a long moment without speaking. The red in the sky below Callum's rest was already beginning to fade, the atmospheric particles dissipating as the creatures moved away. Slowly, somewhere below, the lights came back on. First one city, then another, then across the whole face of the world, light returning like something breathing in after holding its breath for a very long time. Someone in the back of the room made a sound. Then someone else. Then the room was loud in a way Greth had never heard a room be loud before. Greth opened his recording device. He tried to write something. He closed it again. He would need to find different words than the ones he had. Greth's official report to the Interstellar Council ran to 9,000 words. He had never written a 9,000-word report before. His previous longest was 3,000 words, filed after a trade dispute between two mid-tier species that had lasted 11 years. He had always believed in economy of language. But when he sat down to write this one, he found that economy failed him, that he described everything. The red sky, the humans choosing to stay, the planets going dark, the bait ship, the civilian platform crew crossing a hot zone with no training and no hesitation. The wall Droz held for 6 hours on stubbornness alone. The territorial signal, Sova's final pass. His summary was 3 words. Do not underestimate. The council acknowledged the report. Then they requested a full verbal briefing. Then 3 separate member species requested copies of the atmospheric ion seeding methodology. Then the request came in that no human government had ever received before, a formal invitation to join the Interstellar Council's defense planning body as a primary member, not an observer. Humanity had been a secondary observer species for 60 years. Ray heard about the invitation while sitting in the station's small dining area eating something that had gone cold. He read the message, set down the food, and went to find Nadia. She was already asleep at her workstation. He put a jacket over her shoulders and went back to his cold meal. Greth found him there. He sat down across from Ray without being invited, which he had noticed was something humans did frequently and which he had decided to adopt. Ray looked at him but didn't say anything. I would like to ask you something, Greth said. Go ahead. How did you know it would work? Ray thought about that for a moment. I didn't, he said. Greth waited. 14 civilizations tried fighting or running, Ray said. Both failed. So those were off the table. What was left was understanding the thing, what it needed, how it thought, what it was actually doing when it moved through a system. Nobody had ever spent time on that. Everyone was too busy being afraid. He picked up his fork. We were afraid too, but we were also curious. Greth considered this. Curiosity, he said, and the fact that we didn't have enough ships to evacuate 800 million people, Ray added. That helped focus things. Greth almost made the sound his species used for amusement. Almost that he said, Nadia believes you can map the migration routes. Create safe corridors. She's already working on it, Ray said. She thinks if we seed corridors through uninhabited space with a territorial signal, we can essentially guide them. Keep them out of populated systems entirely. No more red skies. And if they adapt? Greth asked. If they learn the signal is not real? Ray shrugged slightly. Then we figure something else out. Greth looked at him. You say that with no concern. I say it with a lot of concern, Ray said. I just don't think concern is useful until we need it. Sova appeared in the doorway, her arm in a light support brace from a minor injury during the Wren's final maneuver. She looked at Greth, then at Ray, then at the cold food on the table. That looks terrible, she said. It is, Ray said. She got a chair and joined them. Droz came in 20 minutes later, and then Nadia, woken by the noise, appeared in the doorway with a jacket still around her shoulders and her eyes half open. Bex, the platform crew chief, had been invited up from the surface and arrived not long after, quiet and observant, clearly unused to being in rooms with admirals and strategists. They sat together in the small dining area of an orbital station above a world whose sky had stopped being red. Greth sat with them, but he did not file notes. He did not record. He had 9,000 words already in his report, and he thought that was probably enough for the council. What was happening in this room was something different. Something he did not have a professional category for. Later, back at his station, he updated his species archive. He found the entry he had created 2 days earlier. The one labeled with humanity's name and the date and the column he had been prepared to fill in. He deleted the column that he wrote instead in the section reserved for notable civilizational traits. When the sky turns red, most species run or fight with what they have. Humans do neither, and both, and something else entirely that does not have a name yet. They stayed. They made the planets invisible. They flew a single ship at the face of something the size of a moon. They made a sound large enough to give an ancient creature pause. They did all of this without certainty, without guarantee, and without stopping. The sky turned red. They declared war. And the galaxy, Watching will not forget what they saw. Neither will I.